Every empire in history had a plan for them. Babylon said, "We will take them from their land." Rome said, "We will destroy their temple and scatter them." Medieval Europe said, "We will expel them," again and again. The 20th century produced the most systematic attempt to erase a people in human history. Every single one of those empires is gone. Babylon is dust. Rome is ruins and tourism. The regimes that built the death camps lasted 12 years. And the people they all tried to erase? Still here. Still speaking a language that was dead for 2,000 years and came back. Still celebrating holidays that are older than most of the world's major religions. Still arguing, writing, debating, creating, with a continuity of identity that has no parallel in the history of our species. This is not a story about religion. This is not a story about politics. This is not about the Middle East today. This is a history question, maybe the most fascinating history question there is. How does a people survive everything? To understand how the Jewish people survived, you first need to understand what they were before the catastrophes began. Go back to around 1000 BC. In the narrow strip of land between the Mediterranean Sea and the Jordan River, a land the size of New Jersey, two small kingdoms existed, Israel in the north, Judah in the south. By ancient standards, these were not great powers. They didn't have the armies of Assyria. They didn't have the wealth of Babylon. They didn't have the monuments of Egypt. What they had was unusual, a text. While other cultures of the ancient world kept their religious knowledge in the hands of a priestly elite, secret rituals, oral traditions controlled by specialists, the Israelites were producing something different, a written record, a national story, accessible in principle to everyone. The Torah, the first 5 books, was not just religious instruction. It was history, law, poetry, and identity all woven into one document. This matters enormously for what comes next, because when empires destroy a people, what they really destroy is memory. They burn the temples, they erase the language, they replace the gods. The Israelites had found a way to carry their memory that no army could burn. They had written it down, and they had made it central to daily life, not just for priests but for fathers teaching children, for communities gathering on the 7th day, for the rhythm of every single week. The text was the people, and the people were the text. In 722 BC, the Assyrian Empire destroyed the northern kingdom of Israel. 10 tribes, gone, scattered across the Assyrian Empire and absorbed. History calls them the 10 lost tribes, and they were in fact lost. They assimilated. They disappeared. The southern kingdom, Judah, survived. For now. In 597 BC, the Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar arrived with his army. He didn't just defeat Judah. He dismantled it. He took the king captive. He took the priests. He took the scribes, the craftsmen, the nobility, the entire educated class of Jerusalem, and marched them 800 miles east to Babylon. In 586 BC, he came back for the rest. He destroyed Solomon's temple, the central sanctuary of Israelite religion, the place where God was believed to dwell on earth. He burned Jerusalem, and the exile began. Now, think about what this moment meant. Every ancient religion of this era was geographic. The gods lived in specific places. You worshiped them in their temples in their cities. If you lost the city, you lost the god. If the temple burned, the religion died with it. That was the Babylonian logic. Destroy the temple. Destroy the people's connection to their god. Within a generation, they forget. Within 2, they assimilate. It had worked on everyone else. But something extraordinary happened in Babylon. The Jewish exiles, instead of assimilating, sat down and wrote. Scholars believe that much of what we now call the Hebrew Bible was compiled, edited, and in some cases written during the Babylonian exile. The priests and scribes who had maintained the temple rituals now transformed those rituals for a world without a temple. Prayer replaced sacrifice. The synagogue replaced the sanctuary. The Sabbath, the weekly day of rest, became the portable temple that every family could carry anywhere. They invented a form of religion that didn't need a building, didn't need a land, didn't need a king. And then, 50 years into the exile, the Persian king Cyrus conquered Babylon and issued his famous decree, "Go home." In 538 BC, approximately 50,000 people made the long journey back to Judah. But here's the fascinating part. Not everyone went. A significant portion of the Jewish community stayed in Babylon. Voluntarily, they had built lives there, businesses, families. Babylon was cosmopolitan, wealthy, sophisticated, and the Jewish community in Babylon didn't disappear. It thrived for over 1,000 years. The great Babylonian Talmud, one of the foundational texts of Jewish law, was compiled not in Israel, but in Babylon, between roughly 200 and 500 AD. A community in exile, producing the document that would guide Jewish life worldwide for the next 15 centuries. Meanwhile, back in Judah, with Persian funding and permission, the returned exiles built the Second Temple, not as grand as Solomon's, but standing, and Judah became a Persian province, small, relatively autonomous, protected. For 200 years under Persian rule, the Jewish community in Judah compiled, canonized, and standardized their texts. This is the period when the Hebrew Bible essentially took the form we recognize today. The catastrophe of exile had paradoxically produced the document that would make future exile survivable. When Alexander the Great swept through the region in 332 BC, the Jews of Judah faced a threat unlike any they had seen before. Not destruction, seduction. The Hellenistic world, Greek language, Greek philosophy, Greek gymnasium, Greek theater, Greek gods, was glamorous. It was the culture of the moment. The smart cosmopolitan thing to do was to become Greek, and many Jews did exactly that. They took Greek names, spoke Greek, adopted Greek customs. The Book of Maccabees records Jewish priests abandoning their temple duties to go watch wrestling at the gymnasium. Greek culture was the ancient world's version of whatever the dominant global culture is today. Powerful, attractive, everywhere. And then in 167 BC, the Seleucid king Antiochus IV made a catastrophic mistake. He decided that voluntary assimilation wasn't enough. He wanted to force it. He banned observance of the Sabbath. He banned circumcision. He installed a statue of Zeus in the temple in Jerusalem. He sacrificed a pig on the temple altar. He didn't understand what Cyrus had understood 2 centuries earlier. Forced assimilation doesn't erase a culture. It radicalizes it. The response was the Maccabean Revolt, a guerrilla war led by a priestly family against the most sophisticated military power in the region. They won. Against all odds, a small army of religious rebels defeated a Seleucid force with war elephants. The rededication of the temple that followed is still celebrated today, 22 centuries later, as Hanukkah. Every year, Jewish families light candles commemorating a military victory from 164 BC. That is memory. That is the mechanism of survival. The Romans arrived in 63 BC, and Judea became a Roman province. For over a century, the relationship was tense but functional. Then came the breaking point. In 66 AD, the Jews of Judea revolted against Roman rule. Rome's response was overwhelming. In 70 AD, the Roman general Titus, later to become emperor, besieged Jerusalem. The siege lasted 5 months. The city starved. The population, swollen with pilgrims who had come for Passover and been trapped by the siege, suffered in ways the ancient sources describe with unflinching horror. When the walls finally fell, Roman soldiers burned the Second Temple. The fire, according to the historian Josephus, spread beyond Roman orders. Soldiers, consumed by the frenzy of victory and greed, torched the sanctuary before commanders could stop them. The temple, rebuilt, expanded by Herod into one of the most magnificent structures in the ancient world, was reduced to rubble. All that remained was one retaining wall. You can stand next to it today in Jerusalem. People pray there still. The Romans looted the temple treasures and paraded them through Rome in a triumphal procession. The Arch of Titus, still standing in the Roman Forum, depicts Roman soldiers carrying the temple menorah. The Jewish state was extinguished. In 135 AD, after a second revolt, the Emperor Hadrian went further. He renamed the region Syria Palestina, deliberately erasing the name Judea. He built a Roman city, Aelia Capitolina, over Jerusalem. He banned Jews from entering it. By every historical precedent, this should have been the end. But here is what happened instead. The rabbis, the teachers, the interpreters, the scholars, gathered in a small city called Yavne, even before Jerusalem fell, and they did what the exiles in Babylon had done 5 centuries earlier. They sat down and reinvented Judaism for a world without a temple. The Mishnah, the first major written collection of Jewish oral law, was compiled around 200 AD. It contained in precise detail, the rituals of the temple, how sacrifices were performed, how the priests were organized, how the holy days were observed, temple rituals that could no longer be practiced, written down with extraordinary care, so that when the temple was rebuilt, because it would be rebuilt, it had to be rebuilt, they would remember exactly how to do it. That hope, preserved in text, kept a community oriented toward return for 2,000 years. After 135 AD, the Jewish people scattered to Babylon, where the community was already ancient and established, to Alexandria in Egypt, where a massive Jewish population had lived since Alexander, to Rome itself, ironic but true, to Persia, to Yemen, to Ethiopia, to India, eventually to Spain, France, Germany, Poland, to every corner of the medieval world, and everywhere they went, they brought the same thing: the text, the calendar, the Sabbath, the holidays, the Hebrew language, kept alive for prayer even when nobody spoke it daily. The Jewish community in China, the Kaifeng Jews, maintained their identity for nearly 1,000 years in complete isolation from the rest of world Jewry. The Jewish community in Ethiopia, the Beta Israel, preserved traditions dating back to ancient times, without any contact with the Talmudic world, and were recognized as Jewish by mainstream authorities in the 20th century. Communities separated by thousands of miles, by language barriers, by centuries of isolation, and yet recognizably connected. Same holidays, same calendar, same core texts, same Passover story told every spring. We were slaves, and we were freed, generation after generation after generation. In medieval Europe, the situation darkened severely. Jews were expelled from England in 1290, from France in 1306, from Spain, the Alhambra Decree, in 1492, from Portugal in 1497. The expulsion from Spain alone displaced roughly 200,000 people. The expelled Spanish Jews, Sephardim, carried their language with them. Ladino, Judeo-Spanish, was spoken by Sephardic communities for 5 centuries after the expulsion. Communities in Istanbul, Thessaloniki, and Amsterdam were still speaking a form of 15th century Spanish in the 20th century, a linguistic fossil, a people carrying the sound of a country that had thrown them out 500 years earlier. The 20th century brought the worst. Between 1941 and 1945, the Nazi regime of Germany systematically murdered 6 million Jews,
a tentativa deliberada de destruição.
1/3 of the Jewish people worldwide. It was the most industrialized, bureaucratized, deliberate attempt to destroy an ethnic and religious group in recorded human history. There is nothing to say about this that doesn't fall short. Entire communities, centuries old, were erased in months. The Jewish communities of Poland, Ukraine, the Baltic states, communities that had produced literature, music, philosophy, that had developed Yiddish as a living language rich enough for Nobel Prize-winning literature, were annihilated. And yet, 3 years after the liberation of Auschwitz, 3 years, the State of Israel was declared, in 1948, in the same land from which the Jewish people had been expelled by Rome 18 centuries earlier, speaking Hebrew, a language that had not been spoken as a native tongue since roughly 200 AD, revived, modernized, and made the daily language of a new nation. Eliezer ben Yehuda, the primary architect of modern Hebrew, insisted his son be raised speaking only Hebrew, so that there would be at least one native speaker to start from one child in Jerusalem in the 1880s to the national language of millions. The revival of Hebrew as a spoken language has no parallel in human history. No other dead language has ever been fully revived as a native tongue for a living population. It should have been impossible. So why? Why did the Jewish people survive when so many other ancient peoples simply didn't? The Moabites are gone. The Edomites are gone. The Philistines are gone. The Phoenicians, who gave us the alphabet, are gone. What was different? Historians point to several factors. The text. No other ancient people had made literacy so central to religious identity. The obligation to read, to study, to transmit knowledge, built into the weekly rhythm of life, created a people where education was sacred. You couldn't lose the knowledge even if you burned the buildings. The calendar. The Jewish year is a cycle of memory. Passover remembers slavery and liberation. Tisha B'Av mourns the destruction of the temples. Hanukkah commemorates a military victory. Purim marks a survival from genocide. The holidays are not merely religious observances. They are annual acts of collective remembering. The legal tradition, the Talmud, and the rabbinical literature that followed it, is extraordinary, not just as religious text, but as a way of thinking. It models argument, counter-argument, uncertainty, nuance. It teaches people to question authority respectfully, including the authority of the text itself. A people trained to argue carefully are a people equipped to adapt. The community structure. Wherever Jews settled, they built institutions, schools, courts, charity organizations. The community was self-sustaining, semi-autonomous. You could move a Jewish community from one city to another, and it would reconstitute itself, because the institutional knowledge traveled with the people. None of these factors alone explain survival. Together they created something remarkable, a portable civilization, one that didn't depend on land, temple, king, or empire, one that could be reconstructed anywhere, from the same texts, the same calendar, the same practices.
In
Jerusalem today, people press small pieces of paper into the
parede.
cracks of a 2,000-year-old wall. The wall is all that remains of the temple that Rome destroyed. They are writing prayers, the same prayers, more or less, that their ancestors wrote in Babylon
Escrevem as
26
mesmas
centuries ago.
orações que
The
seus
empires that
ancestrais.
tried to erase them are studied in universities. Their ruins attract tourists. Their languages are dead. And the people they tried to erase are arguing about those empires on the internet in a language that was resurrected from the dead. History has many lessons. Most of them are grim. But this one, the story of how a people survived everything by making memory itself indestructible, is something else. It is evidence that ideas, properly embedded in daily life, in language, in ritual, in text, can outlast stone, can outlast empire, can outlast almost anything. If this kind of history moves you, the real, complicated, astonishing kind, you're exactly who this channel is for. Subscribe, and I'll see you in the ancient world.